When someone goes to prison, they lose their right to freedom. But it also means they lose their right to vote. Why exactly does that get taken away?
There's a direct link between ending slavery and saying you no longer have a right to vote if you've been convicted of a crime or even incarcerated.
And some powerful people want to change that in Oregon.
It's not a deterrent to future crime, and it's not really even the punishment.
And you know when you're at Disneyland and you're waiting in line outside for a ride for hours, and you finally get inside to realize there's just another huge line in there? That's kind of what it's like trying to get the vaccine, especially for 65-year-olds who just became eligible in Oregon today. Here's the story.
Yeah, let me know, 65-year-olds. Does it feel like the wait is over? I bet not. It's Monday. Hi, I'm Dan Haggerty. Welcome to The Story. This is the show that relies on you to talk to us about what you want us to cover. So all the contact information is at the bottom of your screen. Use that hashtag HeyDan on Twitter. Send us an email at thestory@kgw.com. Let's get into the big story. And I'm going to start the big story with a big question. Why can't prisoners vote in Oregon? If you think you know, I promise it's more complicated than that. Now, I bring it up because there's this new bill in Salem to allow all inmates the right to vote from behind bars. Multnomah County's district attorney, Mike Schmidt, he supports this. He calls it a no-brainer, actually, saying that our current policy doesn't deter crimes and was born out of racism.
When we sentence people into a courtroom after a crime, what you'll hear a judge talk about is how much time they're going to spend in prison. I've never heard anybody talk about, and you know, you're going to lose your right to vote. It's not a deterrent to future crime, and it's not really even the punishment. The punishment is your loss of freedom. So why are we doing this collateral consequence?
Now, before we get all wrapped up in Oregon and what we plan to do here, talking about doing, let's get some context. Let's look at how some other states do it. And there are basically 4 approaches to this sort of thing, generally. And most states do one of the first 2 things here. They do what Oregon does, which is felons can't vote while they're behind bars. But as soon as they're released, as soon as they're out of prison, they're good to go. They can vote again. Or in some other states, you actually have to complete probation and parole. So it's not good enough to just leave prison. You have to finish some other things, pay off some fines, penalties, that sort of stuff. Then you can vote again. Then there are the extremes. In about a dozen states, some felons never get to vote again once they're incarcerated. That's it. They're done. And in 2 states, Vermont and Maine, every prisoner gets a vote from prison, even convicted murderers. So Oregon is embarking on some pretty progressive policy here, and people have noticed. And by people, I mean John Legend. He tweeted, "I believe everyone affected by the decisions of our democracy deserves to have a say in it. They shouldn't be silenced. Oregonians, contact your legislator to help restore the voting rights of incarcerated individuals in Oregon." And I shared this tweet for a specific reason, and it's not because he's a celebrity. It's because of that very last sentence. Restore the voting rights for prisoners. He's right. Prisoners used to be able to vote here in Oregon. I mean, not all prisoners, not black prisoners or female prisoners or white prisoners who didn't own land. Look, the history of voting in this country is complicated and it's fluid. Voting isn't some well-defined assumed right that you can find in our founding documents. In fact, the only people who have always had the right to a vote have been rich white men, or more specifically, a white man who owned land. Then you just had to be a white man a little while later. And then after the slaves were freed, a black man could vote, which is an oversimplified explanation we'll get into in a minute. And then in 1920, women were finally guaranteed the right to vote. But those are like the heavy-hitting headlines. You know what I mean? Lawmakers have been tinkering with voting since the beginning and often try to make it harder or easier for people to vote, with the Supreme Court making it pretty clear on their end that it's up to the states to work out the details on voting. Right now, Republican lawmakers in Georgia are pushing for voter ID laws that would make it harder to vote. In fact, their state house just passed a bill to do that this very afternoon. A few years ago, you probably remember here in Oregon, Democrats were trying to lower the voting age to 16 because Oregon registers everyone as soon as they get their driver's license, and because most 16-year-olds are not conservative Republicans. But I digress. The point is, voting laws change a lot. And to learn why they were originally changing for inmates, I talked to Professor Laura Appelman from Willamette University.
When did it change from, because we've been, society's been putting people behind bars for a very long time. So when did that decision come into play that once you were put in jail for a felony offense, your rights to vote would be taken away, whether it was while you were behind bars or, in some cases, once you were released and still kind of playing out that part of your sentence?
Right after we abolished slavery. It happened almost immediately afterwards. Before, it was never a thought that even if you were convicted and placed into whatever sort of local jails or prisons, you could still vote. Once we, ended slavery, I think there was a lot of fear, of course, that newly freed slaves would vote. In fact, when you look at Reconstruction in the South, that's exactly what happened. That slaves voted, and they elected other legislators who were African American, and pretty much nationwide, North and South, we said, oh, no. So there's a direct link between ending slavery and saying you no longer have a right to vote if you've been convicted of a crime or even incarcerated.
But look, the racist origins of the law can't be the only defining factor, I don't think. And there are several reasons why. For one, nationally, most people on the left and right support the way that we do it now. In the 2020 Democratic primaries, all of the candidates from the left agreed that prisoners should not vote from behind bars, except for Bernie Sanders, who is the senator from where? Vermont, where they vote, and where most of the inmates are not black. Most of them are white in that state, just like most of them are white in this state. In November of last year, the state's 12,989 prisoners, 1,195 of them were black, 1,744 of them were Hispanic, and 9,409 of them were white. The rest were Native American, Asian, or Pacific Islander. So while the voting law may have been a way to keep black people from voting, in Oregon, it's stopping way more white people from voting. I mentioned this to Nicole Lewis, who writes for the Marshall Project, a group of journalists based in New York City who focus on the criminal justice system.
It's not just people of color or black people that we're talking about here. It is overwhelmingly, and this is true not only in Oregon, but across the country, that people who are incarcerated come from low-income communities, right? And these communities share some features in common, right? So there may be low educational attainment, low literacy rates, but certainly low income. And I think, when I think about why this issue is so important, right? It's not just a fundamental question of fairness or should we be, accounting for this racist history. It's a question of, if we take all these millions of people away from their home communities, we incarcerate them, and we do not allow them to vote, it means that elected officials also never have to really take seriously the issues that matter the most to these people, right? And so if we think about that on a large scale or even on a small scale, Oregon incarcerates around 13,000 people. And so that means over time, right, it's been around 150 some odd years. The impact is that we have not had to address the issues of low-income people in the same way that we would any other community that's not over-incarcerated.
Now, I know what you might be thinking, but those people broke the law, black or white, rich or poor, and oftentimes hurt innocent people in some way. DA Mike Schmidt argued that giving prisoners the right to vote can help in their rehabilitation process. But, that's not the only reason that people get locked up. It's punishment. It's also retribution for the victims.
So I think the argument you may be referring to is that now I think there's a separate argument, which you hear, and I think people who are opposed to the bill have argued, that once you have committed a crime, you have basically lost your right to participate in society. That one of the punishments that we impose for committing a crime against the community is to say, well, until you have been fully punished for your crime, we're taking away various things, often your freedom, your liberty, your money, but also your right to vote.
As an example, I read this article in the New Yorker that focuses on a man named Foster Bates voting from a state prison in Maine. And he's quoted in the article saying, "As a voter, my job is to assess the best candidate for my values, my family's values, and the values of the country." Bates is currently serving a life sentence for rape and murder. This is an extreme example. Most people are not in prison for murder. Most are not in for life. But this type of example does not sit well with a lot of folks. Here in Oregon, when the governor moved prisoners to the front of the vaccine line, I got a real sense of what people feel from home. I got countless emails that really gave me a look at how a lot of people view prisoners and the rights they think prisoners should have, not just to vote, but to live. The conversation here will continue as they talk about this bill. We'll see what kind of support it gets in Salem and how the conversation there moves forward. But I'd love to hear your thoughts as we do that. For me, this is one of those important conversations about reform. You know, at face value, it really is not a massive issue. We have more than 2 million registered voters in Oregon and about 13,000 prisoners. But these discussions matter in the nuance that make up our justice system. Not just how it started, but what we've turned it into. Email me at thestory@kgw.com, find me on Facebook, or send me a tweet with that hashtag, #HeyDan. All right, let's talk about the vaccine, because today a whole different big group of people became eligible in Oregon, those 65 and older. I know, here it is. You've been waiting for a long time, and I hope you're used to waiting because you're going to have to keep waiting. And that's because there was a big backlog of people now who are eligible. Now, I know this rollout has been confusing in a lot of different ways, and we've been sending your questions to Pat Dorse, who's been on the vaccine beat for us since day one.
We have more great questions about the COVID-19 vaccine, so let's dive right into them. Let's start with Kim, who says, apparently the J&J vaccine is not as effective as Moderna and Pfizer. Here's a thought. Why don't they give that vaccine to the teachers and the bar goers and non-mask wearers in the 20 and 30 age group and give us seniors the more effective vaccine? Personally, I would hold out for the good stuff. Just saying. Kim, I can just hear a bunch of seniors going, yeah, good for you. But no, they're not going to do that. All right, let's pull this apart. First off, is Johnson & Johnson as effective at keeping you from getting the COVID virus? No, it's not. It's about 66%. Those other two are about 95%. But Dr. Fauci and others say the number you should really focus on is 85%. It's 85% effective of keeping you out of the hospital and keeping you from getting an extreme case of COVID-19. And so you should really take it. But no, I don't think they're going to give it to the 20 or 30-year-olds or the teachers who won't go back into the classroom or people who refuse to wear a mask. But I know that there's a lot of frustration about those folks, and you're expressing it well. I'm not saying I'm agreeing with you. Don't send me nasty emails, but I'm just saying, yes, I hear you. All right, moving on. Dave says, regarding the getvaccinated.oregon.gov, where they supposedly call you when an appointment is available, are you put in a queue based on when you signed up, or is it an age-based queue? Hi, Dave. Thanks for the question. The answer is no, and back to you. Just kidding. When I asked that question Friday from the OHA, they said, oh, it's going to be random. It'll just be totally random. So over the weekend, they sent 1,900 names to the organizers of the Oregon Convention Center. And those folks are starting to make calls. They started Monday morning. They're going to call people between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. for the next 4 days. When I've asked them specifically, how are you randomizing this, they haven't answered. I mean, I can't imagine that they're, sticking some names up on a wall and just throwing darts, but there ought to be a system where it is truly randomized, and they ought to be able to tell us that. And so far they haven't, but I'm sure that they'll come around to the spirit of transparency and let us know what that is very soon. So thanks for your questions. Keep them coming, gang. That's what's going on with the COVID vaccine today.
Hey, let's count. I like to count. Let's do our daily vaccine count. We're going to check in. As of this afternoon, more than 629,821 people have gotten at least that first dose of a vaccine in the state of Oregon. So more than half of those people have actually gotten a second dose as well. But if we just look at that first dose, that gives us almost 15% of the state's population, 14.8% with at least one shot. In Washington, more than 1,007,000 people have gotten at least their first dose. So we're over the million mark as far as counting concerns goes in Washington, which works out to be about 13.5% of their state's population.
Oregon Congressman Kurt Schrader's been making a name for himself recently, mostly by being one of the only Democrats to vote against stimulus checks.
You want someone that's going to be a party hack? Like somebody else. You want someone who's going to represent the 5th Congressional District of Oregon, and my great state? You elect me.
And yeah, we're going to talk about those allegations against TikTok Doc and OHSU's not so great track record of harassment and discrimination lawsuits when the story continues.
Yeah, it's been a year since you could sit and watch a basketball game in person. We asked on Instagram if you remember where you were 1 year ago when the first COVID case was reported in Oregon, which was technically a year ago yesterday, Sunday. We're sharing some of your responses tonight throughout the show. Leave me a comment at the story KGW on Instagram. By now, I'm betting a lot of you have seen the story about the so-called TikTok doctor being accused of sexual assault and harassment while working at OHSU. If you don't know who I'm talking about, let me explain for just a minute. Dr. Jason Campbell went viral last year for these TikToks of him dancing in scrubs. It was a feel-good story during the pandemic. I mean, we covered it. We interviewed him a few times. He got national attention at one point. He was even featured in President Biden's virtual inauguration parade earlier this year. But while he was going viral, one of his colleagues claims he was also sexually harassing her. She just filed a lawsuit against Campbell and OHSU in federal court. She says the harassment began in January of 2020 with pornographic and sexually explicit texts and social media messages. Then in March, she says Campbell came up behind her and pushed his body and erection into her over a desk. The woman says she reported this to at least 13 different people at OHSU, including some people who were in leadership roles and mandatory reporters. And despite these accusations, the lawsuit says OHSU continued to promote Campbell during his viral fame by posting about him on social media and featuring him on their website, that sort of stuff. Again, this all happened after Campbell was accused. Now, the hospital sent us a statement saying, in part, OHSU does not condone behavior as described in the lawsuit. We are continuously working to evolve our culture, policies, and practices to provide an environment where all learners, employees, patients, and visitors feel safe and welcome. Now, these allegations are obviously problematic on their own, but in this case, they are exactly that, allegations. And we're going to wait to learn more, just like everybody else. But I do want to take a look at the bigger picture here, because the lawsuit also claims sexual misconduct is buried at OHSU. Perpetrators of alleged sexual misconduct are praised, protected, and even glorified. Victims are not protected. They are shamed, dismissed, and subjected to retaliation. Again, these are accusations, and OHSU says that they do not condone this behavior. But let's look at some recent history for some context. In 2019, an internal survey of staff and students found the university had a problem with sexual harassment and discrimination. According to the Lund report, 26% of people reported they were the victim of sexual misconduct within the last 3 months. 26%. And 22% said it happened to them a year or two ago. That same year, OHSU was hit with 4 discrimination lawsuits, 2 of them over sexual harassment. One employee says that she complained to her supervisor about being harassed, but claims she was told the accused harasser was, quote, probably on the spectrum, and that he probably just, quote, admired her. Another woman says after she complained about a sexist work environment, she was told, quote, lay low, this is the culture. The woman accusing Campbell wants her suit to go to trial by this summer. We'll keep you posted. Now, over the weekend, I got a couple of emails like this one from Leslie. My Congressman Kurt Schrader of Oregon's 5th was one of 2 Democrats who voted against COVID relief, and he hasn't explained why. I would like to know what made him think his vote was a good idea. Maybe you can find out. Yeah, so the House did pass the latest COVID relief bill on Saturday, which includes another round of stimulus checks. But Congressman Schrader joined every single Republican in voting against it. So today we got a chance to ask him why.
A number of very huge problems. Number one is there was no legislative process. I mean, we were presented with 1.9, not allowed or encouraged to offer amendments. I think 2 amendments got in accidentally, one of which was, at least I know for a fact, expunged in the Rules Committee. The voice of the elected representatives not heard in this package at all. It was a take it or leave it approach. And $1.9 trillion, every other COVID package that we've done not only has been bipartisan, but has gone through an extensive vetting process, before, during, and after it came together. Why are we not allowed to represent our districts? There's a ton of stuff in here that has nothing to do with COVID, nothing to deal with the emergency at hand. Some of it's very good, good stuff, but not at all related to COVID. That's being, I think, disingenuous to the American people with Oregonians. The minimum wage increase was ruled out of order by the parliamentarian, and we did it anyway. The rules don't apply to us. And I'd argue respectfully, as a small businessman for 30 plus years, there's not a small businessman or woman out there that thinks raising the minimum wage in the middle of a pandemic when we're trying to get them to hire people makes good sense, particularly in struggling restaurant and hospitality industries. That makes no sense at all.
All right. Look, this isn't the first time Schrader has spoken this way or reached across the aisle or broken away from other Democrats. This isn't totally out of character for him. In December, he voted against increasing stimulus check payments to $2,000. However, he did vote for the first 2 rounds of checks. After the insurrection, Schrader initially opposed impeaching President Trump, likening it to a lynching in a call with other House Democrats. He apologized for that, and he ended up voting eventually to impeach President Trump. Schrader was also one of the last Democrats to support President Trump's first impeachment. So he's got a bit of a track record here of being much more moderate than a lot of other elected Democrats, especially here in Oregon. And we asked him what he has to say to some Democratic constituents, people who don't really feel like maybe he is representing them or the Oregon party.
I'm not elected just by the Democrats. I'm elected by Republicans, moderate Republicans anyway, and non-affiliated voters, and a lot of moderate Democrats that don't agree with, the one-size-fits-all far-left approach. You want someone that's going to be a party hack? Like somebody else. You want someone that's going to represent the 5th Congressional District of Oregon and my great state? You like me.
Now, it's worth noting Schrader's district is pretty purple. It includes some pretty solid blue areas, like parts of the metro area and Salem, but there are some really red places too, like rural Clackamas and Marion counties and the Coast Range. Last May, Schrader was primaried by a more progressive challenger, Milwaukee Mayor Mark Gambia, but he easily beat him with 70% of the vote. All right, keep your questions coming and those comments. Use that hashtag #HeyDan. We're going to read a few when we finish the story next. All right, man, you caught me. We came back too quickly. I'm looking through some comments here, things to talk about. What do we got? I should be more prepared, don't you think? So Robert Fuller, we were talking about people getting incarcerated. He said, come on, there are thousands of white-collar criminals who are never convicted of their crimes, and not only can they vote, but they can often hold office. Okay, I see what you're doing there. But also when we talked about money, and we talk about the discrepancy of money in our justice system, that's a big part of it. I was talking to somebody today and saying, look, if you were on trial for something and I gave you 2 options, no money or unlimited money, which one would you choose? And you would pick the unlimited money every single time if I put you on trial 1,000 times. And the fact that that's true to that percentage, it should be something we discuss, right? Especially when it comes to representation and people voting. Judy said, rather than focus on giving voting rights to prisoners, let's first start with making sure that all of the rest of the populace can vote. Let's put our energy into passing a federal voting rights bill. So the Supreme Court, and I touched on this really quickly in that piece, the Supreme Court has made it true literally since the end of slavery that it's going to be pretty much up to states to handle voting and the way they do that. And we definitely saw that play out in 2020, didn't we? How everybody kind of does it differently. A lot of places weren't up to par with what we do. And Oregon is in love with its voting process, and they should be because it's so darn easy.
This is my first presidential campaign, presidential voting here in this state, and it was remarkably easy sitting down and learning and being able to vote by mail. But what if some other state or the federal government came in and started telling us which way we're supposed to do it? You have to put it that way too. So again, usually the states are put in charge to make those types of decisions, and I'm rambling, which happens sometimes. But this has no inside pocket. That's the story. It's a Monday. I'm doing the best I can. I'll see you back here tomorrow. Send me your questions.